Welcome to the deep dive. You've shared some really interesting sources with us today, all focused on Honeywell security alarm systems.
That's right.
So our mission here is basically to sift through this, pull out the key stuff, especially any potential downsides someone might face if they're thinking about going with Honeywell.
Exactly. And the sources cover quite a bit. You've got the Vista panels, the Lynx, the Pro Series, and their AlarmNet communicators.
Okay.
And, well, right off the bat, the sources hint at maybe a bumpy ride. One mentions this long trail of technical, financial, and cybersecurity problems. So, yeah, let's dig in.
Okay, a long trail.
Yeah.
Sounds intriguing. Let's start with something that always gets people forced hardware upgrades. The sources talk about the 3G sunset in 2022. What exactly went down there?
Right, the 3G sunset. So basically when the mobile carriers switched off their 3G networks, a whole bunch of Honeywell and Resideo products that used 3G to communicate just stopped working.
It's working,
Yeah.
like completely.
Yeah. We're talking popular stuff like the Vista GSM V4G, the Lynx Touch GSM VLP 5 4G. The source says dozens of other radios too. Suddenly, their security systems couldn't phone home, couldn't send signals.
Wow, that sounds chaotic. So what did people have to do? Just junk their systems?
Well, not quite junk the whole system, but they were forced into buying completely new LTE radio boards, to get back online using the newer networks.
And that costs what?
The source estimates that a replacement LTE XA radio, plus getting someone to install it, often exceeds USD 200, 300.
Ouch. So upwards of $300 just because the network changed.
Exactly. And it's not just the money, right? It's the precedent. Your hardware works fine, but suddenly it's obsolete because of an external change. Makes you wonder what happens next time.
That's a really good point. Unexpected costs and, uncertainty. Okay, what about reliability? The sources mention AlarmNet outages, big ones.
Yeah, this is another major point. March 13th, 2022, AlarmNet and the Total Connect 2.0 app went down for about 12 hours.
12 hours. What did that mean for users?
It meant alarm signals weren't getting through to the central monitoring stations. People couldn't log into their apps. The source says it basically silenced millions of radios.
Millions. Wow. That's not good for a security system.
Not good at all. And the sources mentioned this wasn't a one-off event either.
Oh, there were others?
Yep. There was apparently a similar nationwide outage back in October 2018.
Okay, so this seems like maybe a pattern.
Well, it certainly highlights what the source calls the risk of a single vendor cloud. Everything runs through Honeywell's AlarmNet. If that system has a problem,
Then everyone has a problem. A single point of failure.
got it.
Precisely.
Let's switch gears a bit. Security vulnerabilities. The sources use terms like CVEs and mention CISA advisories. Can you break that down for us? Why should we care if Honeywell has many of these?
Sure. So CVE's common vulnerabilities and exposures are basically known security flaws in software or hardware. CISA is the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency, and they issue warnings about serious ones.
When the source says Honeywell has many CVEs, and some have critical scores like 9.8 out of 10, well, that's bad. A 9.8 is about as serious as it gets.
And what could happen with a vulnerability that bad?
The example given, ICSA 2319406, could allow remote code execution. In simple terms, a hacker could potentially run their own commands on your system from afar.
Whoa, like disarm the alarm remotely.
Potentially, yes. Or access cameras, mess with settings, maybe even use it to get into your wider home network. It's serious stuff.
Yikes. And there were other things too, hard-coded credentials.
Yeah, that was another one flagged in 2024 for some Lenel S2 netbox controllers, which Honeywell owns, rated critical. Hard-coded credentials are like having a default password baked in that anyone can find and use. It's a huge security no-no.
Definitely sounds like it. The source also mentioned something about a physical issue, a back door for Vista panels.
Ah, yes. Apparently, there are published procedures,
Right.
ways for someone who gets physical access to the panel, even briefly, to basically reprogram it without needing the master code.
Wait, so someone could break in, quickly mess with the panel, and disable the alarm without the code?
That's the implication, yes. It kind of undermines the whole point if physical access lets you bypass the codes.
Okay, so we've got potential remote attacks and physical bypasses. Not a great combo. Let's talk hardware again. Discontinued communicators. What's the issue there?
Right, so the 7847i IP communicator, that's a device that lets the panel talk over the internet, was apparently discontinued. but crucially, without a drop in replacement.
Beaming.
Meaning, if yours failed or you needed one, you couldn't just swap in a new identical one. You might be forced into like significant rewiring or having to upgrade to those pricier LTE communicators we talked about earlier, even if you didn't need cellular.
Another forced, potentially expensive upgrade path.
Seems like it. And adding to the confusion, the source says dealer websites might list lots of communicators as end of life, but you might still find sales brochures floating around for them.
So it's hard to even know what's current and supported.
It can be unclear, yeah.
Yeah.
Which isn't ideal when you're making a long-term investment.
Makes sense. Let's talk money. The sources bring up proprietary lock-in and potentially high costs. How does that work?
Well, the main thing is that Honeywell panels generally require you to use their own AlarmNet radios. You can't just plug in a communicator from another company.
Unlike some other brands.
Exactly. Competitors like DSC or Colseas sometimes let you use third-party communicators. That gives dealers, and potentially you, more options, maybe leverage on the data plan costs. With Honeywell, you're kind of stuck in their ecosystem.
Locked in.
Yeah.
And does that affect the price?
It can, yeah. For the monthly monitoring, the source suggests AlarmNet plans often run USD 40 or more, whereas competitors might be closer to about USD 25. That adds up over time.
$40 versus $25, that's a big difference monthly. What about the initial hardware cost?
The source suggests that can be higher too. It gives an example. A basic Vista 20p panel, plus the bits you need, like a zone expander and an LTE radio, could end up costing 30 to 50% more than a modern all-in-one panel with built-in LTE from someone else.
So potentially more upfront and more each month. Doesn't sound great.
It's definitely something to factor into the total cost of ownership.
Okay, shifting to actually using the system, the source calls the user experience antiquated. What does that mean in practice?
Think about the classic Vista keypad. The source says the design basically dates back to the mid-1990s.
Wow, so no fancy touchscreens or anything?
Nope, just buttons, no voice prompts. It feels very old school compared to modern systems.
Yeah.
And even the newer Lynx Touch and Pro Series panels, the source claims they use dated resistive screens, the kind you have to press harder on, and have limited smart home integrations.
So if you want your alarm to play nice with your smart lights or thermostat?
Honeywell might not be the smoothest option based on this info. Competitors often integrate much more broadly.
Gotcha. What about the people installing these systems? The source mentioned patchy documentation. Is that a big deal?
It can be, yeah. If the official manuals gloss over important wiring details for things like KNX or RS-232 integrations.
Which are ways to connect to other smart building stuff.
Right. If the details are missing, installers have to waste time finding unofficial guides online or, like the source says, basically reverse engineer the bus, trying to figure it out themselves.
Sounds frustrating and time-consuming.
Yeah.
Could lead to mistakes, maybe.
It definitely could. And potentially higher installation costs for the customer if the installer is spending extra hours figuring things out.
And if things go wrong later, what about tech support?
That's another concern raised. The source mentions reports from dealers about waiting multi-day waits for Tier 2 engineering callbacks.
Multi-day waits during a critical outage.
Exactly. If your security system is down or acting weird, waiting days for expert help is, well, less than ideal. Could leave you vulnerable.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground here, mostly focusing on the potential issues raised in these sources. Let's try to wrap this up. Based on everything we've discussed from your sources, what's the bottom line for someone looking at Honeywell?
Well, pulling it all together, the sources really paint a picture centered around proprietary lock-in, ongoing recurring fees, that history of forced hardware upgrades, and these pretty significant documented cybersecurity holes.
And on top of that,
You get a user experience that, according to the source, lags competitors by a decade.
so the final recommendation from the source is pretty clear then.
Yeah, it's quite blunt, actually. It says, better priced, more future-proof alternatives exist. Skip Honeywell, save your budget, and spare yourself the headache.
Okay. So based purely on this deep dive into the information you brought us, it seems there are definitely some serious potential drawbacks to weigh up if you're considering Honeywell.
Absolutely. The points about the forced upgrades, the outages, those security issues, the potential costs, the user experience, it all suggests, doing some serious comparison shopping before committing.
It really does.
Yeah.
Which leads to a final thought, I suppose. Given all these things, the upgrades forced on users, the big system outages, the security holes, the costs, what are the sort of longer-term implications for people, homeowners, businesses who are relying on these systems day in, day out. It's more than just the tech specs, isn't it? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for digging into this with us today.